Welcome back to the MMA Training Bible's Guide to Peak Performance. So here's a little look at the table of contents. You can see what we've already covered. In the first session, it was a blueprint for building peak performance. We talked about our approach to creating an individualized and periodized training plan for you. So I hope you have a good idea of what we're going to be doing. And this session, we start that process. We're going to start by scheduling the big training phases across your fight plan. After that, we're going to start getting into more details. We're going to forecast training volume and intensity across your whole fight plan. Then we're going to talk some periodization. We're going to start planning your training subphases and your training weeks. And of course, we're going to finish off by showing you exactly how you program training sessions across your whole fight plan. So welcome to session 2, scheduling your training phases. Now we've got some learning objectives for you. Now, in this session, what we're really going to do first is we're going to match up the calendar with your chosen fight date, whether it's actually in the books or you're just estimating it. Both are fine. But the most important thing that we'll aim to do is to schedule the training phases for your fight plan. And that includes, of course, the transition and then the taper and the fight camp and, of course, the fight-specific preparatory phase. And obviously, for the longer plans only, we have the general preparatory phase. The shorter plans, they don't have this. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover in this session. First, you need to download or print out the fight plan template. And if you're working with paper and pencil, that's what you want to do, which I do recommend. Or you're going to need to fire up Excel if you're going to be using your computer and get ready to roll. Now, after this, we'll focus on planning the transition, followed by the taper, and then we'll organize the fight camp, and then we'll lay out the fight-specific prep phase, and then for the longer plans, we'll slot in the general preparatory phase. But again, this is not something that we need to worry about in the shorter plans. Okay, so let's get into it here. So if you haven't already, please pause the video, download and print off the fight plan template that you're going to be working with, because you're going to need that. You're going to be working along this video as we're going to complete this thing. So please download that, pause the video if you haven't already, because we're going to be moving in on this. Okay, so let's dig into this here. Now, for step 1, this is a review of what we're going to do. The first thing, as you can see here, that we're going to do is we're going to schedule the transition, which should last 3 to 6 weeks after your fight. Next, we'll schedule the taper, which always takes up to 2 weeks before your fight. Then we'll schedule the fight camp, which always takes up the 8 weeks before your taper. And of course, in the longer plans, the next thing that you need to schedule is the general preparatory phase, which should take up at least half of the remaining time. And this phase, it doesn't take place in the shorter plans because, as we've talked about in the past, the shorter plans, they assume that a fighter is more advanced and they have a solid base of fitness. So otherwise, the last phase to schedule, it's the fight-specific preparatory phase, which simply takes up the remaining time. So what I want to do is I want to give you an example of this. Okay, so let's walk you through this process step by step. Now, as I said before, I'm going to be using Excel here because I really think that it's a better online teaching tool, but I do recommend that you follow along using pencil and paper. And if you make mistakes, you can pause the video, you can always tighten it up later on. So, we're working with a 12-month plan here, and the 12-month plan assumes that a fighter is interested in fighting in about a year or so. That's pretty far away, and you may not have a date, and you probably don't if that's the case. So just ballparking it is fine. But in any case, the first thing that you need to do is to enter the calendar months and weeks in your fight plan starting from today. Now, ideally, you want to start from the closest Monday. So if today's a Friday, then you're going to just jump ahead to maybe the next Monday, because you always want to start your plan ideally on a Monday. That way all of your weeks match up. So let's have a look at what it looks like in this example. So again, you can see the calendar month and the calendar weeks have already been entered into this plan. And as I scroll through, I can scroll across a plan. Again, we're looking at fighting in about a year or so. So you can fill it in accordingly. So this is where we're at the end of the plan. So this is obviously going to take some time for you, so I recommend that you pause the video and don't move on until you've completed this step. Now, just to keep things moving, like I said, I'm gonna go on and I'm gonna walk you through what you need to do. But again, I recommend you pause the video now. Okay, so I'm assuming that you've entered in your relevant calendar information. In this example, you can see here that the amateur fighter is planning on fighting their first interclub on October 11th at a local gym. So let's enter this into your template. You can see it's entered up here at the top of this template. So go ahead and roughly ballpark, if you're not sure, when you are planning on fighting. Okay, so now that you've matched up your fight plan with the calendar months and weeks, then you can start scheduling the big training phases across your fight plan. And so you should start with the transition. So you can see here the transition is already scheduled, and you'll also notice that the transition, it can take up to 3 to 6 weeks. In this case, it's about 6 weeks or so. And this transition, it's a period that's designed to dissipate all of the fatigue that was built up during your fight and of course during the entire fight plan. And it's called the transition because it helps fighters and coaches transition from their current plan into the next fight plan. So if you haven't already, now's the time to go ahead and enter your transition. And if you're in the 12-month plan, it really should be somewhere in the region of 6 weeks after your intended fight. And this stuff, like I said, can be adjusted slightly, but we want to start to craft a plan now. So now that you've scheduled the transition, which if you haven't already, pause the video and do that. I'm going to assume that you did. The next thing that you want to schedule is the taper. So the taper, it always takes up 2 weeks before your fight. And this is about the optimal length to bring about a peak in your performance without seeing any detraining effect. So you can see that here in this example, the taper is scheduled roughly 2 weeks before the fight is scheduled on October 11th. So 2 weeks before that is when we have that taper. Again, you can count off the blocks, the weeks, and then just schedule that taper in. And so you can see how easy this is. You're just identifying the weeks and then matching up the particular phase with the weeks and where it is in accordance with your fight. So after you've scheduled the taper, the next thing that you want to schedule in the fight plan, it's the fight camp. And that always takes up to 8 weeks before your taper. And so again, you can see that here. You can count off the weeks, 8 weeks before your taper. And that just equals your fight camp. So go ahead and pause the video now and then write your fight camp in. Now, because we're working with the 12-month plan here, we're going to schedule a general preparatory phase. And so the rule of thumb here is that this phase should take up 50 to 60% of the remaining time in the calendar. So in our case, we have roughly 44 weeks that make up the remainder of time. So what we're going to do is we're just going to split it in half. The first 22 weeks of this plan are going to be a general preparatory phase. And so let's go ahead and schedule that in. I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So as I scroll back to the beginning of this plan, you can see everything we've scheduled. You can see starting from here, if we counted up all these weeks, it would work out to be about 44. And like I said, we want to take about half of that time and then dedicate it to the general preparatory phase. And so you can see here, we've taken about 22 weeks and we've dedicated to the general preparatory phase. If we scroll back all the way to the beginning of the fight plan, you can see that the general preparatory phase takes up that entire block. And so what this leaves is this gap between the general preparatory phase over on the left and then the fight camp that you scheduled over here on the right. And this is dead simple. Your fight-specific preparatory phase just takes up the remainder of time. So again, pause the video now and go ahead and schedule in that big fight-specific preparatory phase. And so that's it. That's really what we wanted to cover in this session. So just to recap, the first thing that you should have done is matched up the months and the calendar weeks and slotted them in your particular plan. And slot them in all the way over to the end, maybe about a year or so. Even though you don't exactly know when you might be fighting, you think that you might want to fight in a year or so. In this example, it's roughly about October 11th or so. And from there, you schedule in the transition for roughly about 6 weeks after your fight, the taper 2 weeks before your fight camp 8 weeks before your taper, and then the remaining time is pretty much split between the general preparation phase and then the fight specific phase. Okay, so we really got the ball rolling here. We matched up our fight plan with the calendar, and we've scheduled the big training phase, starting with a transition, followed by the taper and the fight camp and the fight specific phase. And of course, in the longer plans, we have the general preparatory phase. So again, I wanted to make it short and sweet. Let's leave it there for now. Next time, we're going to dig into forecasting training volume and intensity across your whole fight plan. So until then, take care.